What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Welcome to a Tuesday show, gang. Good to see you. Apologies if you were looking for us yesterday. A couple technical difficulties getting Sims run. Couldn't get the dashboard together to do a show that would have been good. Could have sat here. Ooh, I'm looking at the middle column there. What's going on? I must have pasted the wrong update into the last. Looks like I pasted some totals in there. Just caught that. But, just some technical difficulties kept us off the air yesterday. But hopefully everybody had a good day. We were live with projections all day long. Everything was status quo for that. Wacky slate last night with a couple scratches and just some weird performances. Hopefully you guys did all right. I had a couple lineups in, a couple lineups out of the money. Nothing special. Only ran a few. Only running a few again tonight on this little four-gamer that we've got to deal with. Kind of an ugly slate. We're waiting on a lot of key news right now. I was really, really hoping we would get it at 3:30, and that's Utah. Utah a couple times already this season. I was talking about it in Discord. I mentioned it last night when they did it last night. They've held their starters till after their game is locked, or whoever takes the court gets announced as the starters, presumably. But it's been really irritating with them lately. They technically don't owe us this injury report for another 27 minutes, so we'll get it at 4:30, I assume. That's when it's supposed to be due. But it's a real pain in the ass with that team because we have a couple big question marks on that one. And then kind of a couple other fragile spots based on some missing guys, some teams being on a back-to-back. So despite it being a little four-gamer, it's kind of a wacky slate here. So let me grab the correct last games played update here and just drop it into the sheet. One of these days I'll set these up as actual data pulls so I don't have to paste this manually. Oh, of course. Now I put that in the wrong spot. That one goes there. There we go. That's better. I don't think anybody was playing 1,000 minutes in their last game. So hopefully you guys are doing well out there. I've seen some good screenshots over the last couple of days. Hopefully everybody enjoyed Did the Utah news just drop, Tiz? Fantastic. See, I knew we could kick it off if we just jumped on and finalized Sims and everything. Cody Williams out. Jordan Clarkson out. John Collins out. Walker Kessler out. Larry Markkinen out. Fan-fucking-tastic. AJ Green and Bobby Portis also confirmed out. I should have just waited until 4:30 to do this show. I was really hoping I could squeeze it in and it would work out, but this is going to be completely different. So he's out. Who else was on that list? Oops. And we already had, all right, so from here, Collier will go up. Sexton will go up. Keontae George will go up. Drew Eubanks will shoot up the board like crazy. He'll be a top-end value play like we've seen. Filipowski's going to get a bunch more minutes. Sensabaugh's going to get a bunch more minutes. Sheway will get the backup center minutes behind Eubanks. Elijah Harkless will get scraps. Everybody's going to get a bounce. And Utah is going to be stupid again. Great. All right. It's going to be too long a process to do it on air to rerun all of these percentages. But as we talk about things, it's going to be a constant me saying, but don't forget, Drew Eubanks is blah, 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 blah. So bear in mind that this board is going to already look completely different. And we'll have to just kind of deal with the fallout of that. It would be two Sims that I would have to run, and I have to change data back and forth, and we would still have to wait out the ownership update that probably won't come for a half hour, 45 minutes anyway. So, nothing we can really do about the Sim situation. Even if I had waited for 4:30, might not have gone well. It would have probably ended up pushing to 5, and then it would have been just a mess. So let's just talk through this one. One of the fragile plays of the day is up at the top of the board. One of the reasons that Ricky Council is getting so much ownership in this sim is that I have him pretty radically different than he's projected over at the site that I get the ownership from. Those guys are projecting him for low mid 20s minutes, and I gave him 30 in the assumption that he starts in this game. I see no reason that he wouldn't. That's what they've done in this situation in the past few weeks when it's come up. Philly missing a ton of guys again. I give him 30, and he comes up like crazy, but that's because he's going up, partly because he's going up against like 15, 16% ownership in this sim. So take it with a grain of salt on the Ricky Council play at the top of the board. You also, if he doesn't start, that'll drop way down. I'll pop him down to 22, 24 minutes, something in that range. But right now, he looks like a really strong play. The value is going to be there. I'm just talking about the percentage distributions. I don't know if you would run it at 35% ownership that it necessarily would have come up that aggressively. Might have been like a closer angle toward the field and in like the 60s, kind of like you see on Dame and on Simons, the more straightforward, obvious guys. So just a difference of opinion in that projection right now as far as the minutes go, and then that bounces down and has an impact on these distributions. So yet another wrinkle to the top of the board. Putting him and... where was like Collier priced? He's shooting guard on FanDuel, small forward, power forward on... so Collier's point guard, he's point guard, shooting guard on DraftKings, so they don't really share that much positional commonality. I thought Council had guard eligibility on DraftKings. So not that much crossover there to worry about. I think it would just add another value piece. Once you start talking about those Utah guys, they will be in the mix up near the top of the board here again. You'll have on the full position board, you will absolutely have Drew Eubanks, whatever you want to call him, will probably be your most highly owned center in a resim. We got a ton of Şengün. We got a ton of Giannis. That won't go away, but they'll be differently proportioned just because of the positional impact that giving Eubanks suddenly 40, 50% shares at center is going to have. So that's going to reshape the slate for sure. It's always fun. It's always fun doing these shows. Every time we do these shows, even when it's straightforward day at 5 o'clock, it's always going to be a different board. But today, it's going to be a radically different board. So I got to stay on top of changes, stay on top of projections. Speaking of, kind of a wacky slate. 2 games at 7:30, 2 games at 10 o'clock. Enjoy that. At least there's a little dinner break for those of us who stay on top of projections and everything. But not a ton of room to necessarily maneuver as far as swapping goes. But there's going to be a long gap between those games. Maybe that favors the more dedicated, grind-oriented folks out there today. Let's get the Vegas board real quick. We'll talk about the game environments. I'll go through the ins and the outs. We just got the obvious chunk of them that we needed. Lakers at Philly. Lakers favored by 4.5 on the road. 218-point total in that one. Philly without most of their relevant NBA players outside of Tyrese Maxey and then the scrubs that are on the board here. Lakers, both LeBron and AD are probable to play in this one, and then just kind of mix and match plays, but short slate. We'll get to a decent amount of all those guys. Rockets and the Hawks. The Rockets are favored by 6 on the road in Atlanta. Utah just came off the board. Rockets favored by 6 on the road in Atlanta. 226.5 point total there. Last I saw, Trey is questionable in that one. And several other Rockets. Again, we'll go through the ins and the outs. Yeah, Cam Whitmore questionable. Trey Young questionable. So some value could open up on both sides of that one. Milwaukee at Portland, 5.5 point spread favoring Milwaukee on the road, 229 point total in that one. Obviously, we've got Giannis. No Bobby Portis, no Chris Middleton, a couple other guys if memory serves, so we'll take a look at how Milwaukee's coming up. I saw there was a bunch of Dame up at the top of the board. He's been playing very well, so good matchup on the Milwaukee side. We'll take what we get from the Stars, and then I'm sure we'll have some scraps. Portland going to be looking pretty good on their side of that one. It's going to be pacey enough. That's the highest total on the board right now, so definitely some upside in Portland, and they're going to be missing a few pieces and have a few question marks as well. And then that messy Utah team playing Golden State. Like I said, it just came off the board given that news. It had probably been updated already, and then it came down again. The original line from earlier, Golden State was favored by 12 at home with a 229-point total, and now all those guys aren't playing. That line kind of indicated, I think, that all those guys weren't playing to begin with, but we just didn't know for sure who was going to be there, who wasn't, and like if two of them weren't going to be there, then it was probably going to be about the same line. But that's changing, and it's certainly not going to change in Utah's favor. So just be aware of that. Golden State side of that one looks pretty good. Steph looks pretty decent at the top of the board. Pieces and parts otherwise from the Golden State team, just going up against a kind of a pushover Utah team and a bad version of a pushover Utah team. Ins and the outs. AD, Rui, and LeBron are all probable. So is Yabusele from Philly. Questionables, Cam Whitmore, Trae Young, DeAndre Ayton, and Ryan Rupert, who is questionable / G League. And then out, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Kobe Buffkin, Jalen Johnson, Daquan Plowden, who's also in the G League. Cody Zeller has just not been with the team all season. Jalen Schifino, Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, Christian Wood, there's your Lakers. Andre Drummond, Joel Embiid, Paul George, Caleb Martin, KJ Martin, Jared McCain, and Matty Thybulle, all out. So most of your Sixers right there, plus Matty Thybulle. Let's jump into it. 15 people here. Hit the like button. Mamba's here. What's up, Mamba? Anthony Taylor. Anthony Taylor's looking for an AD now after he explodes last night, and I had no shares. Yeah, it's tough to nail down that split between those two, between AD and LeBron. Let's see who came up a little bit more on this one. Where are we at on those Lakers? We can kind of bounce around a little bit on this one. Honestly, neither one came up that much. I'm kind of surprised. 6% of LeBron for 10K. 10.6%. We're below the field on both guys. We do have a big share of LeBron on their FanDuel slate. He's only 99 over there. AD is 11.4 over there. That's a big, big offset. I'm kind of surprised we didn't get a little bit more LeBron, but he is well below our value threshold, just 4.79. Been playing at a 1.39. I've got him somewhere in that territory. Got him at 1.37. Even though it's essentially playing the Philly backups and Tyrese Maxey, it's still a game in which they're going to lose a couple possessions, lose some pace. So has a little minimal, tiny impact in the model on the per minute rates for AD and for LeBron. Like for AD, I've got him down from 1.51 to 1.48. It sounds silly to quibble over 3/100ths of a fantasy point, but again, it has an impact, and it's definitely not a game where they gain ground. So they actually don't look crazy good, which, again, I'm kind of surprised on a 4-gamer that just on the raw scoring aspect of it, we didn't get more. But we do have a ton of Giannis. We do have a ton of Alperen Şengün. We have a ton of Dame that we're spending money on. Looks like a pretty decent share of Steph. So that money's getting spent. It's just getting spent in other spots. Cujo, hope your Tuesday's going well too, bud. Good to see you, Tiz. Andy, good to see everybody. So we can dive in with some positional stuff. Again, keep in mind this does not reflect the Utah news that we just got. We're going to have to talk that through. Mama says, funny how I say things that are always 100% accurate. Putting always 100% accurate all in caps is bold. Said Dame is in form and he proceeds to drop 30 in every game afterwards. Yeah, you did definitely call that out. No doubt about it. So among the guards here, Mr. Lillard up at the top of the board. We don't have a lot of Dame on the FanDuel slate, but keep in mind over there we do have that bigger share of LeBron. We also have a lot of like Jalen Green going through the position. No, actually that's offset position. He's only shooting guard and Dame's only point guard. Fair amount of Steph. A lot of Freddie Van Vliet coming up on the FanDuel slate where he's only 6,800 and giving us a 5+ value. So that's where some of our Dame shares went. Looks like there's just a few more cheaper upper mid-range type options on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we're level-ish with the field on Dame. Massive ownership on him. 62% exposure in our lineups. Significant piece up at the top of the board. 1.25 per minute for the season, as Mamba just pointed out. Playing out of his mind lately. Still only 8,700 too on DraftKings on a 4-game slate. That's kind of crazy value. 5.3 value. That's as good as you're going to get today. Considering who it's from, considering the per minute rate, that 5.3 value plays a whole hell of a lot better than these 5.3 values, even though you're getting these a little bit cheaper. These are two true value guys. One solid mid-range guy in Anthony Simons, who we've got an absolute ton of. But Dame's 5.3 value score, a lot of times I'll say, that guy's at 4.95, but it doesn't really matter because he's such a good player and he can float that. That's so much more the case when you're getting a good value score, even though it's not at 5.5 where we would want it. Still great. 4.49 at the much higher FanDuel price. It's another reason we're not getting a ton of them over there. Simons, lots and lots on both sites. 40% FanDuel, essentially level with the field. Not quite to our 5.0 value mark, but he has positional flexibility on a short slate, which is great, through point guard and shooting guard, which it looks like most of the multi-position guys are shooting guard, small forward until you get down to Buddy Hield here, Austin Reeves a little bit further down, and then a few other guys that Dyson Daniels, Vic Krejci plays. But Simons is the top end as far as shooting guard, point guard flexibility goes. He's only 64 on FanDuel. He's only 61 on DraftKings. That's a really standout value. 0.97 per minute. Again, I like that side of that game a little bit. Come on. Portland should pick up a little bit. Well, no, more evenish. But not a terrible total, 229-point total. For as good as Milwaukee can be, it's not a crazy spread at 5.5. We do have some question marks, and things could definitely change on the Portland side if we get no Ayton. So that's one to watch. Obviously, we know that looks like probably Donovan Clingan getting the start. Probably Robert Williams picking up minutes. Goes from the 4 I'm giving him right now to 14, 16, depending on whether I give Duop Reith a couple or not. But there's a very direct path for those minutes. But that changes, I think, the shape of the game as far as the potential for it to stay close. But the top-end guys from Portland are all going to look pretty decent. I was looking at Simons. I've got him 0.99. And he's been playing at 0.97. I'm talking about, a negligible difference there. In a game where there could be a more appreciable uptick. Mo Moody just looking good for the money. 3,900 shooting guard and small forward eligible. Has him at a 5.39 value score. 0.83 per minute on the season. He is at... The thing I hate with this Golden State team is the minutes. He's playing at 0.83. I've got him at 0.88 going against this light Utah team that's just been floating good scores and higher pace to a lot of teams. So I think there's definitely benefit to looking at some of these Golden State players. It's just, again, the minutes are so shaky. Everybody except for Steph and Wiggins is in the 20s as far as the minutes projections, and mid-20s kind of. And that's what they've been playing by and large. So I do think there's a lot of just cheap value there, but there's also a little bit of fragility in any of those guys. Same deal for Podziemski, 2 spots further down. I've got him at 23 minutes. I've got Mo Moody at 24 minutes. They're both 3,900. They're both coming up. Moody's coming up a little bit more, shooting guard, small forward, versus Podziemski at 39, point guard and shooting guard. He's coming up 35% of the time. He's been playing at 0.88. I've got him at 0.90 today in the model. He's drawing ownership publicly, but we're a little bit ahead of the field there. I think those guys are, mix and match caliber. And when you get to one or the other one that plays a couple of additional minutes, however it shakes out, where there's 24 to this guy, but that might be 26 and it might be 20 instead of 22 for another guy. They're all fairly priced for that. That's why you can get to them. That's why Mo Moody's 3,900. That's why Podziemski's 3,900. That's why I don't see anybody else on the board. Dennis Schroeder further down is 4,900. They all just get mediocre minutes, but at least they're not mispriced in like the 6s. Even Steph is cheap, 89 on FanDuel, 88 on DraftKings. We got him 26% of the time, below the field on DK at 88. He's playing at 131. I've got him all the way up at 140 in the model today. I think that's a little bit behind where the site that did the ownership has him, which makes some sense for why we would land a little bit behind where they have the field projected. I think you could take Steph further north. Again, Utah has been a weak opponent that has given star players especially just massive scores a few times this year. So there's enough reason to believe that Steph could outperform, but I don't want to get too carried away with it. I just kind of let the model do its thing, and it landed at 1.4, so that's high. It's not crazy. But typically if I'm doing things, giving upticks by hand, my limits are usually like all right, this amount of difference gives you like a 0.1 on top of where you might otherwise be. And that's about where we're at. And it has to be a really uniquely exceptional spot to gain further than that. I don't know if I want to go there. But I still think he looks great. I think you play Steph like crazy on both sides. See who's texting me. Boo. My buddy Twitter updating me about his car purchase. I was pushing him toward getting a Toyota that was reminiscent of the old Toyota hatchback that I drove when we were in high school that we called the Horsemobile because it was previously my mom's car and she drove around with like hay in the back because my sister rode horses. So that was the Horsemobile. But he ended up going with a Mazda. Sellout. Mama says just keeping it real. I'm only saying if I definitively make a statement, not my opinions. Yeah, dude, I'm not criticizing. I just found it funny saying always 100% accurate all in caps like that. Because that's something to just be like, the first time you say something wrong is be like, I guess not. Like Colin Sutherland saying, hell yeah, Mazda, all in caps. Now that's on the record forever. Colin Sutherland, gigantic Mazda fan. What do you like about Mazda, Kyle? I honestly don't have a negative opinion of Mazda. I've always enjoyed their work. I don't really know enough about like the company or anything. But we've always owned Toyotas. Or not always, but we've had a handful of Toyotas. My parents had some. I had the Horsemobile. My parents to this day drive a RAV. I think my sister still drives a Highlander. So I guess we're a Toyota family. Anyway. Prioritize the driving a little bit more in their price range. Gotcha. AJ Green, mix and match piece on, no, not even on FanDuel. 0% on FanDuel at 3,800. He did not come up. On DraftKings for 33, he came up a little bit. 20%. He's a 0.68 per minute player. So kind of limit expectations, and we do have a lot of those kind of guys today. Again, with all the handful of the Golden State guys in the threes. Cam Whitmore, if he plays, I skipped over him, but looks pretty terrific. At 3,800, 5.36 value score. This is only in 18 minutes. He's coming up at 44.6%. You give him a little bit more upside than that. Definitely some run there. Again, he's still questionable. So a spot to watch. But we got him like crazy as a value play on DraftKings. Really not at all on FanDuel. He's small forward only on FanDuel. He's got the multi-position on DraftKings, and he's another 700 more expensive. So the 18 minutes just doesn't make it work. He's nearly at our value threshold for a normal slate on DraftKings. Jalen Green on FanDuel, standing out, just 7,000 over there. 0.97 per minute, but he was a 1.02 per minute player last year on basically the same usage. We know that he can score the ball. I do have him up for this game. They're gaining a significant amount of pace. So just everything on the Houston side is floated a little bit. So 0.97, I've got him up about a tenth of a point on top of that. And that's going to be true for a lot of these Houston guys. But looking very solid. Amen, not really picking it up as much. He's all the way up to 8,800. He's very, very good. I definitely would like to have a lot of Amin Thompson, but that's a 38-minute projection now. Multi-position eligible at shooting guard and small forward, but we only got him 3.3% of the time. There's just better fits at those positions today on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's still 8,000. He's got point guard and small forward eligibility, which is just unique flexibility across a lot of different spots. 31% owned, that's lighter than the field, but definitely a significant play. We're in a position on him. I wouldn't mind, honestly, having a little bit more, and yeah, it would push you up to the field, but on a 4-gamer, I think we could get away with that, and there's definitely some upside there. So at 8,000, I like him a lot here, and I like that positional flex. At 88, it's just difficult to carry on the FanDuel board, which is a shame because, again, it's the upper range of minutes out of everybody on the slate. He's been a fantastic per-minute guy this season. The price is still not bad in the raw sense, 88 for the production you're getting, but not for this one, not for this slate. As an alternative to some of the star players, let's see, who's a good comp? These guys are point guards. That's the thing. It just looks like so much savings is going through the shooting guard and small forward spot where most of our expensive guys, Steph, Dame, Maxey for whatever we're getting at him, Trey, most of our more expensive guys among the guard-eligible players on FanDuel are point guards. So there's not a lot of direct flexibility to even decide. It would be a decision across positions where you'd say, all right, I'm taking Steph out of this lineup. Let me plug Amin Thompson in at shooting guard or small forward in this lineup and then have the downstream impact from that. In that role, I think you can absolutely grab Amin in essentially any given lineup, regardless of how he came up here, just for the raw scoring as a pivot. It isn't a bad idea. Power used to export cars. You could send Toyotas overseas with 100,000 miles like it was nothing. Another Japanese product, they build cars that last as if the person won't take care of them, so they take a beating. Yeah, that's the thing about them. The Horsemobile, the car I was talking about before, honestly died because I didn't take good care of it when I was in college and everything. Not to mention, my uncle at a Thanksgiving specifically was like, those old cars, you don't need to put oil in them all that often. And then a week later, it just went like... that died with, I think 180,000 miles on it, and I put 50,000 miles on it in a year and a half. The RAV4 that my mom had after that car, I think they kicked out to 300 and change thousand miles, and obviously, there's obviously ones that go way, way further than that. But yeah, they're great. They're great cars. They run forever. Who are you leaning toward at center after AD? Asks Mamba. We'll take a sneak preview. Little detour. Center eligible players on DraftKings. So, there's a prominent name above. There are a number of prominent names, actually. Several prominent names above AD on DraftKings right now with center eligibility. Şengün, Giannis. I don't know that I would say Adams or Kongwu. Collins is obviously off the board, but that puts, Drew Eubanks in a significant position because he's only 4,100. So this is going to reposition where Eubanks is going to be up here. Şengün will be still highly owned, as will Giannis. Giannis probably mostly not going through the center spot, especially with the share of Şengün that we're getting. But I'm getting less of those Lakers, Mamba. I'm getting less of LeBron and I'm getting less of AD than the field seems to be. I've got them taking a bit of a rate haircut in this one. It's not a blowout narrative or anything like that, really, but there's reason to believe that they could outperform this line. But it's a really low total, just 218-point total. Again, kind of a grindy game. They lose a little bit of pace and possession, so I don't love the Lakers side of that. I don't think there's anything at all wrong with any individual share of AD or of LeBron in any lineup. Don't get me wrong. At 151, he's the second best per minute performer that's eligible at center on the DraftKings slate. The best being Giannis at 1.67. And then nobody else is competitive in that department, really, outside of Şengün up at the top. But nobody else is priced in that kind of a stratosphere. So there's a lot of give and take around AD, and it's the same with LeBron. So I do think there are reasonable other options. I was not expecting to see Steven Adams' name. I would think that this just gets eradicated by a better Drew Eubanks at 41. It is a big price difference still, but Eubanks is going to jump into the 20s for projection. So I think he's going to outpace that. I was not expecting to see that Steven Adams share. That's only a 16-minute projection. He's just 3,300. Wow, yeah, he's projected for fairly significant ownership. I did not catch that earlier. We're below the field at our 22% on Steven Adams, throwing a little twist in there at 3,300. On FanDuel, he's 41 and not relevant in his 16 minutes. Give me Okongwu every time in that matchup in terms of NBA player, in terms of who's going to play more, in terms of who's more highly projected, so on and so forth. But that's the reason for the $3,000 price difference between the two players. We do have a pretty good share of Okongwu on DraftKings at 21%, but we're below the field over there. That said, this is another case of the place where the ownership projections come from have Okongwu specifically projected through the roof today. And I can account for some of it, and I have him highly projected. And part of it is because in this situation, no Jalen Johnson. Since the start of like January, he's been playing around 127 in a per minute since he's been starting, since Jalen Johnson's been out. I have him at 1.24 for this slate. And you can see for this season, his number's 112. It's not exactly a great spot going up against Houston. So I don't love giving him like a lot more than that. If you wanted to take him to what he's been doing since the beginning of January, you give him like another half of a point as far as fantasy points go. But the ownership that this is drawing against has him another 3 points on top of that. So they've got him a full 1/10 of a fantasy point per minute on top of his already accelerated rate for January for this situation. They've got him at 137, which I just wholeheartedly disagree with. So bear that in mind as far as that Okongwu ownership goes. I think our 21% is more likely to be around the field, unless I'm just way off. I mean, does everybody else have them like at 35 plus fantasy points on DraftKings today? Am I just wrong? I don't see it like that. I already had to manually give him credit for some of those fantasy points, and I don't want to give him more. So, I don't know about that one. I mean, I do think this is the correct position to be in regardless. Just take a little bit less if the field's going to run away with a ton of them in a position that I don't know is totally justified. I think he's very good, and he's good in a per minute sense, but it seems like they're getting carried away. Mama says exactly why I asked the question. Saw the board and didn't look like he was a value for you at center. Yeah, it's there is nothing wrong, Mamba, with any given share of AD. He's Anthony Davis. He's spectacular. He's one of the best per minute performers that we've got on any given slate. So never anything wrong with any one share of them, but relative to the board, to the field across 150 lineups, or in just choosing one, he's not mathing out as the best overall option today. Let's get back in. We'll clean up the bottom of guards. And by the way, as far as guys like that, him and how he mass out against Giannis, specifically at that center spot, a minute here, a minute there, a rate bump here, a rate bump there, and those numbers can even out very, very quickly. So sometimes you're talking about a hair's breadth of difference between some of these guys, even though it reflects differently in like how they get exposed. And that's why I always try to say, like, in the raw sense, or in just, like I was saying, with one share, any one given share, totally fine. Not as much difference as it might look like in those distributions between the AD play and the Giannis play. And that's where you can bring ceiling into it and so on. So cleaning up the rest of these guards. Let's see. Kelly Oubre, not really interested on FanDuel. 1% for 7,200 doesn't feel great. 1,000 cheaper on DraftKings. 16% exposed. A little bit below the field. That's fine. I'm never really excited to have Kelly Oubre in a lineup. He's playing at just 0.85 this year. Obviously, there's plenty for him to do with essentially every other NBA player out, but the performances have been kind of few and far between. He did have a decent one the other day, 43.9 in 36 and change minutes. That'll get the Bills paid at 62. It'll pretty much get you there. That's enough at 72 also if you can replicate that kind of performance. So maybe a little bit of meat on the bone, but on average, we're not really getting there with Kelly Oubre at the FanDuel price. Much better look on DraftKings. Freddie VanVleet, much better option on FanDuel for 68 than he is for 74 on DraftKings. Again, the Houston side of that Houston-Atlanta game, I'm very interested in. They can float a little bit of upside there. But 74, high price for Freddie. He's only playing at 0.95 DraftKings this year. 0.94 on FanDuel. The 68's a lot more appropriate. Has him above a 5 value score. He is one of two guards that are above a 5 value score. The other one's his teammate, Jalen Green. So those are your best guard options just directly on FanDuel, the two Houston guards. You do have other options, though, like Kamara at a 4.83 is not too bad. A 4.85 down here on Vic Krejci. One to watch, 4.83 on Amen. Again, you can definitely get more shares of Amen. Anthony Simons is drawing a big share. So there's a lot of spread to work with on FanDuel, but we are getting some pretty significant concentrations on those clear-cut values. Buddy Hield, another guy who's not exactly my favorite. I'd kind of rather go to some of these cheaper value guys on the DraftKings slate if I'm playing it. On FanDuel, since they're essentially the same, I think you probably lean a little bit Buddy. 0.88 per minute. It's essentially the same as Podziemski, but you're getting a little bit. It's 23 versus 24. It's only a minute. Same minutes projection as Moody for 100 more. You're getting a little bit of an uptick in production. So he is coming up more. The sim does reflect that. The 4.69 value is a little bit better than either of those players is going to give you. So on FanDuel, with shooting guard and point guard eligibility, Buddy looks a little bit better, and we got him 30% of the time. At 47 on DraftKings, again, I think I'd just rather live with some of these guys that are just cheaper. Eric Gordon, I've got at 29 minutes. Again, just a major crunch for Philly right now as far as NBA bodies go, but he's not looking great at 4,400. He's playing at just 0.64 per minute this season on FanDuel, 0.65 on DraftKings. For just 4,000 on DK, we've got better options. We just highlighted a few of them right there in the threes. So you can play some Eric Gordon, but doesn't really look good. Again, that's the worst game environment on the board overall. So outside of just the minutes and the lack of overall talent on that Philly team, I really have no love for Eric Gordon. Tyrese Maxey, on the other hand, I definitely think you could take more shares of than we're getting on either site. I don't know that I would push all the way back to the field on either one, but if you end up like 10% on DraftKings instead of 6%, still undercutting the field, but maybe it's more like this or like this in terms of how that arrow would look. Maybe we're not as dramatic an undercut. 98, not a bad price for a Tyrese Maxey do-everything kind of a spot. 119 per minute for the season. Definitely an uptick in rate in this situation. 10,000 on the FanDuel board. We got him 9% of the time. If you end up, same story. If you end up like 15, 12, 15, I think that's perfectly fine. Any given share of Maxey, same story as with AD. Totally fine, especially in this kind of a situation. Just, again, low-end game environment. Kamara on FanDuel, we got 24% of the time. On DraftKings at 56, really didn't come up that much. Same positional eligibility at shooting guard and small forward, but a lot less relevant for the 4.57 value than he is at the 4.83 value we're getting on FanDuel. Reasonable amount of upside. He takes a little bit of a bump. Again, like everybody on the Portland side of that one. Little bit of a bump. He's at, where'd he go? 0.77 for the season. I gave him, or the model gave him, 0.03 additional per minute. 3/100ths of a fantasy point additional. He's at 0.80 today. Looks decent, but we're under the field on the FanDuel board. And again, mix and match play on DraftKings, which all these next few guys are. Austin Reeves, under the field at nearly 20% on FanDuel. Mix and match play at 3% on DraftKings. 1.01 per minute is a good option as far as a per minute guy goes once we start getting down to the board in the range where there's a lot of interchangeability. But that price doesn't really jibe with a lot of the guys that are around him in this part of the board. 75 on FanDuel, 78 on DraftKings. At least he's got positional flex on FanDuel. It's keeping him relevant. Really don't like it on DraftKings. Max Christie, no thank you. 2% DraftKings. At best, a mix and match option with a low per minute. Same with Andre Jackson. Assuming he's out there, 0.65 across sites. Meh. Trey is an interesting one. He's definitely one that qualifies for that any given share of Trey. Perfectly fine. But again, the Atlanta side of that is not incredibly appealing going up against Houston. We've also got Dyson Daniels and Vic Krejci right here. The most relevant piece out of those three players from Atlanta is Vic Krejci on FanDuel, who we got at 28%. Been playing at 0.81 per minute for the season. That is exactly what he's at today. .85 value score at that mark across small forward and shooting guard. I think it's just one of those pieces that just goes through the machine. The price is reasonable. The value is not standout, but it fits. It just kind of slides through the gears and lands in a lot of lineups. We are below the field, though, and I think this is the appropriate position to be in. He's not an exciting opportunity. 13% usage guy. Dyson Daniels is definitely the more exciting player. He's given us the bigger fantasy upside in a lot of spots this season. The issue with him is just the way that he accrues his fantasy points is difficult to project on a slate-to-slate basis. He's not a super high usage guy, though he does see more usage than the Vic Krejcis of the world at 17%. He's been performing at 1.04 per minute, 0.97 on DraftKings, gets his hand on the ball a lot, scores through stocks. He's difficult to nail down. I've got him at 0.99 today, so a little bit behind the curve going up against Houston. And taking a little bit of a haircut there. Probably a little more playable than he looks here, given that we've got one share of him across each lineup. He, at the very least, on a short slate, has absolutely rock-solid secure minutes. You could do worse than Dyson Daniels. If he's going to be super low owned by the field, too, I think he's at least an interesting pivot point for some ceiling. Not one to get carried away with. You don't want to say, well, I got 0 or I got one share across 150 in the sim. At the field is at 5%, so I'm going to grab 35%. No. We want to get a few shares. If you get to the field, fine, so be it. But a few shares as a mixer, I think, is fine. Going crazy with it is not the approach. Little outlier Colin Sexton down here. And again, as I'm saying all of this, bear in mind this does not currently reflect the Utah guys. So Clarkson's off the board. We're just going to be getting more of all of these guys. Isaiah Collier is going to be a big part of that conversation in the mid-priced guards. He's going to probably box out Shaedon Sharpe shares. He's going to box out shares of probably Vic Krejci, even on FanDuel at the cheaper price. There's probably going to be more upside now for Collier that's going to squeeze some of those shares. He's probably going to squeeze some of the Tamani Kamara shares at 53, although they don't share a common position, so maybe not. On DraftKings, they do have commonality at shooting guard, but we don't have a significant exposure there. 52. It's interesting. He's kind of a offset price fit. 52. Outside of the guys that are immediately around him that we really didn't get much of, that 52 on Collier doesn't really compare directly all that well with a lot of these. We're either fairly significantly higher or fairly significantly lower. That's going to be interesting. That actually, he might not end up hitting the board quite as hard as I'm thinking. Just because of where that price lands. He's going to go up. But it might be more to like this kind of territory. as far as, maybe like 20s and below the field. That's going to be interesting to watch in the rerun of projections, which will come after the show. Yeah, Portis is out. I do like Lopez. Got him at 34 minutes, if memory serves. Yeah, 34. Played 35.5 the other day. 27.5 fantasy points. Not going to get you there, but we know Brolo's got the upside. 65 on FanDuel. We really didn't get him, but 57 on DraftKings. He came up. Just under a 5 value score 11% of the time. I don't mind that option at all, and I think there's another minute or two there in a close game. I don't think it's going to be a particularly close game, but there's another minute or two for him there. Gets softer if there's no Ayton. I think we're basically through the guards there. Let's jump on some forwards. I'll put the centers on the board at the same time because there's just so few guys to talk about overall. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe if you're new here. If you haven't subscribed in the past, it does actually help. Pumping up those subscriber numbers. It's taking us a little time to get our 1,000, but we'll get there. So help us get to 1,000 subscribers. Also check out rotoscouts.com. That's where these projections live. You're not getting the full dashboard here with all the sim results and everything. That you need to take projections, run them on a sim site. I use acemine.io. They're our sim partners. Promo code RotoScouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month with those guys. At RotoScouts, if you go over to RotoScouts, you gain access to NBA, NHL, and NFL projections, all for under $1 a day. Access to all of it. NFL's ending, but MLB right around the corner. We're going to have some season-long content sprinkled on top, I think, this year. Every single main slate we're going to be covering ins and outs of everything. Baseball's my favorite. We are deep in the weeds as far as baseball goes in a good way. So dive in when you get a chance. Everything is under $1 a day. No per sport nonsense. No surprise fees. No uptick next week after you subscribed at one price. The price changes. None of that. It's under $1 a day. Weekly, monthly, and quarterly plans. Enough selling. Doug, what's going on, buddy? Good to see you. How you doing? Who you like today, Doug? Doug's a sharp guy. Listen to him in the chat. We've got a great chat as far as sharp people go. I love it. We might not have the biggest room in the world, but we got some sharp folks in ours. Pull up some of these other shows. The one that I want to get, one of these days I want to schedule like a show invasion. There's this one show that pops up on my YouTube feed. I can't remember the guy's name on it, but he gets like 200 and change viewers. He gets more viewers than I do, and it pisses me off because the guy does his show at like noon, and all he does is literally pull up DraftKings and show you the pricing table and just go down it and say like, this guy's a pretty good NBA player. This guy, he's averaging like 22 points a game. He's really good. I like him. So we'll go to that guy. And then you might not want to go to this guy. And he'll be talking about guys who aren't playing. He won't talk at all about game environment situations, anything that has anything to do with anything. One of these days, we're going to have a show raid over there. I'm going to send a bunch of you guys to just drop links or whatever. Jack Koff likes AD and ABC Bills. That'll work. Yeah, if you can get Anthony Davis and Giannis together, that'll work nicely. I think there's probably enough value to do it, especially, again, accounting for the Utah guys, which the Sims, if you weren't here earlier, the Sims ran before the Utah news. Should have scheduled the show for 4:30. I knew it, too. I knew it was going to happen. I was talking about it as it dropped. But, I think there should be enough value to get to that, and that's obviously a great build on a three-gamer, just maxing out on points per minute, guys. Appreciate it, Jack. Jack says down to raid for Team McPhee for sure. Love it. OMG Lulz is here. What's going on, man? So Doug says Doug's just getting into things. Cheap low on play. Gary Trent for Doug. That's an interesting one. Where's Mr. Trent right now? That'll be FanDuel a little bit harder. 16% below the field on FanDuel. On DraftKings at 4,100, he landed in just 2% below the field over there as well. Won't be hard to twist things and get a decent share and get above the field there. I would expect that's, 5-8% public ownership on him probably. My issue with Gary Trent is like a lot of these guys, 0.67 per minute, 0.69 per minute so far this season on the whole. But at least with Trent, we do know he's capable of more. We've seen it in the past, 0.80 per minute on nearly 20% usage last year. He's got a big usage hit in his role this year and just has not been performing when he's gotten the opportunity. But any given slate, there's certainly upside there, and you could see some upside against a soft Portland team for him. So I don't mind it. Relatively secure mid-20s minutes at worst for a fair price. See, give me anything. I could sell anybody. He'll shoot more against Portland. There you go. I'll take that. Yeah, anytime you're going to get more shots for a guy, again, who performed significantly better with a few more shots in his pocket just last year, absolutely good reason to grab him. Oh, Millie, you know who I'm talking about? I've seen a few of his videos, but he's saying what comes to mind, he just rambles down the list. Yeah, that's the thing. It's not like, there's no actual DFS value to it. It's like, I was watching SportsCenter earlier, and now I'm here repeating what I heard about the NBA. All right, cool. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm the best as far as, like, I know exactly what role this guy plays when that guy goes out without sitting here and making sure I'm correct by referencing past data and all of that. Like, top of my head, sometime Dennis asked a question the other day, and he was asking, does Brandon Clark play the point when Kennard starts and Scottie Pippen doesn't play? And I think so, but I don't want to commit to, until I can cross-check. Maybe other people know that, but you got to talk about the actual fits and the math and the salaries in here. If you're out there watching shows where they're not talking about any of that, you're just watching the wrong stuff. Power, how is Ricky Council projected for crazy ownership on in other places? I talked about that at the beginning of the show. And I'm curious, this is where, there's the fog of war, right, with some of this. I get ownership from one spot that I've talked about before, and some of you know where it is, and some have probably never heard. But I talked about it at the beginning of the show. I have Ricky Council projected for like 7 more minutes and significantly better than what they've got. So the ownership that we're seeing here, we're at 90 and 85% in the sim results. That ran against like mid-teens ownership on Ricky Council. I think they've just got him wrong. He's projected for massive ownership across other places in like 30 minutes. All right, so everybody's reading it the way I'm reading it, except for those guys for whatever reason. I got to switch sites at some point. It's getting a little bit hairy. They've just got a decent optimizer. That's really all it is for baseball. It's really only the optimizer for baseball. Anyway, all right, so yeah, highest don't play. That's where he should be. So, again, the massive shares that we're getting of Ricky Council here are correct. They're appropriate. As usual with these plays, you don't necessarily have to have him in almost every lineup, but you want a very, very significant share of Ricky Council. This is, again, assuming that he's starting. If we don't see him start, then maybe his minutes come down. Maybe we peel back 4 minutes and give him 26, but there's still going to be upside there. So, at worst, he's still going to have some value. But to me, coming in, he was like the smash spot of the slate, so... Yeah, that's the thing. I don't want to do that myself. For one, I would have to subscribe to a bunch of different sites and then like manually aggregate things. And that's never something that like I would publish like on my site. And I know people do that. And for one, the more people that do that, the more the snake is just eating its own tail as far as that goes. If this guy's copying that guy's ownership, who's copying that guy's ownership, who's copying the original guy's ownership, then where the hell are we? But I've never quite cracked it myself. But yeah, I would just like a better source. The shame of it is I'm not going to go give Awesemo my money right now, unfortunately. Because they do, in my opinion, have the best ownership numbers. I don't think it's particularly close. But we move on. So Ricky Council, again, just get him. Unless you see it change pretty dramatically, just put some Ricky Council shares in your pocket. 4,300 shooting guard on FanDuel. 5.95, the best value score on that slate. 6.0 value on DraftKings, the best value score on that slate at small forward, power forward. Moses Moody, we talked about. Şengün, definitely looking like a big piece. 9,000 on DraftKings, center only, 44% share. Again, that is coming up without having the Drew Eubanks shares in here. So I question what it's going to look like on FanDuel, where we got 88%, which is dramatic. Again, everybody on the Houston side of that one taking a little bit of an uptick, but that's a lot of Şengün. That's going to come down against the $4,900 Drew Eubanks play that's now going to get significantly more highly projected. We did not get a lot of the $4,100 Steven Adams, but that's only in 16 minutes. Where we did get that I was referencing before on DraftKings at $3,300. That came up as a value. That, again, will be interesting to see how Eubanks bounces off of that. Okongwu I talked about. I think this is correct. He's dramatically overprojected, in my opinion, on that site where the ownership comes from. I like him. I think he's a good player. I think I've got him projected fairly. The price isn't bad. But I suspect that this is going to be more close to the field. And somebody who has ownership from a different site might be able to corroborate that. But I think this is where I want him. If the field runs off and grabs like 35% or whatever, I'm happy to be 21, 25, somewhere in that territory. DeAndre Hunter looking like a piece on both sides. 57 on DraftKings. We got him a little below the field, but still 1 in 5 lineups. 1.01 per minute player. On the FanDuel slate, 35%. Pretty significant. 5,800. Again, I don't love the Atlanta side of that one, but given his price, given his pretty solid minutes in the 30 to 32 range, I don't mind that. And he's a decent enough per minute guy from that 5,000 tier at 0.96. Decent enough usage upside, especially in the changed environment overall for Atlanta. Yeah, Doug, I like that Portland side of that. I don't know where Denny is on this board. Oh, there he is. Literally the next guy we were about to talk about. So, yeah, I'm kind of disappointed we're not a little ahead of the field, honestly. But 4.57 value, where we landed makes sense now that I'm seeing it on this board. When I was seeing it in the other sheet and putting the projections together, I was like, ooh, Denny could be a good spot alongside of Anthony Simons, who we were getting a lot of, but didn't come up like crazy. But again, he's decently priced for his production. 1.05 per minute is not bad for 7,600. 7,200 even better for the 1.07 on DraftKings. We got him 15% of the time. It's below the field, but that's one where if you landed around the field on a 4-game slate, I think you're perfectly fine. What I don't know that I would do is double this and go to 30 to try and gain ground against the field, unless you've got him projected for significantly higher. Colin's not going to play, so don't worry about him. Again, we are going to have a dramatically different board with some of these Utah guys. So in addition to Eubanks, none of these three are playing. So Filipowski's going to go up. He's only 4,400. We weren't getting him on FanDuel. He's a 0.85 per minute player in normal circumstances. I'll have to check what the rate looks like in these circumstances, but we're going to get more Filipowski. We're going to get more Sensabaugh. Filipowski played 25 in the last game. Sensabaugh played 15. Not a gigantic uptick from here for Sensabaugh, but we'll see what it looks like when I sort out this mess of projections. What I will say is he's pretty significantly higher price. 5,000 against the 43 for Filipowski, the 41 for Eubanks. There's not a lot of lanes for him to look better than those guys, unless we end up at like 30-something minutes. Doug thinks Trey sits. That would be another wrinkle. Yeah, Atlanta's been a little bit messy. If Trey sits, that would put... I've got Keaton Wallace at no minutes right now, but that would definitely put him back on the board. I don't think they sent him back to the G League. Yeah, pretty sure Keaton Wallace is still with the team. So that would put him back on the board. So yeah, this tiny 4-gamer has a lot of wrinkles. Some that we already know, fortunately, and we'll have plenty of time to get reprojected. But there are a lot of wrinkles still to come potentially. Here's LeBron. I referenced him before, but 6% on DraftKings. The biggest position that we've got on either of the Lakers stars is that 9,900 power forward, small forward eligible LeBron on FanDuel, where we got him 19%, but still below the field. I wouldn't mind having a little bit more on either site. Any given share of LeBron is perfectly fine, and on FanDuel, he looks good, not great. 4.71 is not to our 5.0 value score. It doesn't matter quite as much. It's a little bit higher than AD's at 11.4, much higher price. It's not quite as high as the 8,800 on Amen. The 5.03 for 11.9 on Giannis is, again, a different price stratosphere, but obviously a better value mark. So LeBron's competitive with a ceiling that's equal to any of those guys, but not popping for quite as much, and we are below the field as some of those guys. Andrew Wiggins coming up a lot. 50% on FanDuel, not nearly so much on DraftKings. 7% over there. He's 68 on DraftKings. He's 66 on FanDuel. Multi-position on both sides at both forward spots. Playing at 1.0 per minute on FanDuel, 101 on DraftKings. But again, a nice little uptick for everybody on Golden State here against a soft opponent. He's one of two guys projected for more than 30 minutes on the Golden State team as well. I've got him at right about his average, honestly. The model did not give him a significant uptick. 1.02. So, one 100th of a point was all the matchup was worth for Andrew Wiggins. I think you can conceivably give him another fantasy point and a half if you want to push a little bit more ownership on DK. I don't think he's a bad option, but he's not coming up against the field in proportions that suggest he's like a great go-to play like he is on FanDuel. 50% of lineups in the top 150 on FanDuel. Yabu with plenty to do, assuming he plays. Just 6% on DraftKings. Power forward and center eligible for 6,000. He's a power forward only on FanDuel, but that's honestly preferable. Well, it doesn't matter if he was power forward and center, but I'd rather have him with power forward eligibility than center eligibility is my point, because of the centers that we're going to want to get to on the FanDuel slate. So we can put him alongside those guys. 22% exposed. He's a 4.87 value. Playing at 0.84 for the season. He did play nearly 30 minutes the other day and put up a half a fantasy point per minute, which is really disappointing for your money. He's not exactly cheap at 6,000. It'll be interesting to see how he gets boxed out by the Filipowskis and so on of the world. I think he might lose even more ground here when we're already behind the field. The minutes are what I like there for the money, but that price has gone up to a point where it's not a great value fit anymore. Finney Smith, mix and match, 8% FanDuel, less on DraftKings. He's only 37 on the DraftKings. He's only 38 on FanDuel, actually. 5%, 8%. It's about right. That's who he is. 0.69, 0.70 over the last 2 years. 0.71 on DraftKings. Had a nice dunk last night. Again, Kamara, a much better fit on the FanDuel slate at 24%. Not really coming up much on DraftKings, just 4%. Quentin Post, I got him at 16 minutes. In 23 the other day, he put up a disappointing 15.9 FanDuel points. He has played his limited minutes, 7 games, 12 minutes a night at 1.05. Temper expectations. I gave him 0.98 for tonight. A little bit behind the curve for where he's played those limited minutes so far. Jury's still out in the model. 14 and 16% of, we talked about Gary Trent, but Guy Santos coming up a little bit, 22 minutes. Again, another guy with just cheap price, but just garbage minutes. Everybody in Golden State just gets 22, 24, played 19.8 the other day. He put up 11.8 fantasy points. It just creates such a basement for production when guys are just, you don't really have the upside to be on 28 minutes. Not only do you not get ceiling, you carve out like this huge gully underneath your play where they can just easily fall into an 11-point day that even at the cheap price, it doesn't even make you competitive. You technically can win with that score in your lineup, but it gets really, really challenging. It's not, for an 18 for that price, it's not where you want to be, but you'd be all right. But that kind of production, and that goes for a lot of these Golden State guys with the lower mid-20s minutes. It really, really creates some fragility around those projections. Low-end plays on DraftKings the rest of the way. Krejci we talked about on FanDuel. Markkanen's not on the board anymore. Dylan Brooks, biggie yesterday, 40.3 minutes, 41.6 FanDuel points. Damn near doubling his usual production. He's a 0.70 per minute player, 0.68 last year, 17% usage guy. It's Dylan Brooks. There's no reason in the world to go chasing last night's score. But for the money at 47, shooting guard and small forward, he looks at least playable. He's a spot filler on FanDuel with rock-solid minutes. 4,900 on DraftKings, not really coming up. Power forward only. Shooting guard, small forward has a lot more value on the FanDuel slate than his power forward eligibility does on DraftKings. So I think you can forgo the shares here. Don't get chasey here. I think owning him below the field, even if you get sub 10%, is perfectly fine. The odds of him repeating last night's performance are pretty thin. Everybody else, mix and match at best. If Ayton doesn't go, Klingon will go up from here, though. Keep an eye on that. 4,400, that'll gain ground. That'll get at least competitive with Drew Eubanks. There's a lane through which those are both at 10. So depending on how we get Portland news, this is probably for a while going to swing toward Drew Eubanks, but then it might swing back toward Donovan Klingon, depending on what happens there. We might have it. You guys might be shouting it at me. But keep in mind, Klingon is 500 cheaper than Drew Eubanks even, and he's been outperforming him in a per-minute sense in roughly similar samples. 33 games of Klingon at 16.8 minutes, 35 games of Eubanks at 15.2. We did have more with Eubanks last year where he played at 0.91 per minute. We know he can produce in a per-minute sense, but we've seen it from Klingon, and he checks in cheaper. So if we get starters run from him, that gets interesting. Here we go. Trey is in. Bogdan is out again. That's Wednesday. Wednesday. A lot of Wednesday. And then we're back to Utah. All right, so Trey in, Bogdan out. That'll free up 22 downboard minutes for Atlanta. And it's probably going to be a case of like Garrison Matthews will get a handful of those. Reese Shea might get like 2 additional. Not sure on the top end. There might be like a scrap minute that goes to like, one for Hunter, one for Krejci, that kind of a thing, as I'm just kicking some minutes around. Maybe it gets Roddy a couple of minutes of garbage minutes at the end. That might be the other direction that I put those 2 to 4 minutes or whatever. It's not a massive piece because he was only at 22 already, but there will be a little bit of additional bounce for a couple of those guys. So yeah, we don't have that Portland center news. This head-to-head right here could get really interesting. We already know Eubanks is going way up. But if Klingon goes way up, that might be the better play, at least on FanDuel. On DraftKings, it's the other way around. It's 41 for Eubanks. It's 45 for Klingon on DraftKings. So there's some interesting back and forth across sites. It's probably going to be underappreciated on FanDuel because of how most sites are geared around DraftKings. They'll probably be talking about it this way and ignoring it more on FanDuel. So keep that in mind, particularly if you play on the blue site and you get the 8 and out Klingon starting news. I think he becomes a better play, almost certainly, than Eubanks would. And it'll probably get a little bit underreported because it's on FanDuel. And it's the other situation on DraftKings. I think Klingon would be a value on DraftKings, but Eubanks would probably end up stronger, just given the price difference. But definitely an interesting back and forth. And that also, it's a 4-game slate. You'd almost definitely end up there naturally. But it definitely demands that you want more than one swappable spot. You don't want to only have the center spot to swap back and forth between those two guys on either site, because then you gain no ground in any other spot, given the value that you gain swapping from one to the other, if we get that situation at all. But you definitely want to have 2, preferably 3 spots. And you will. Again, it's a 4-game slate. 2 of those games are at 10. So you definitely want to have multiple spots open, though, to enhance your swappability around those plays. Again, Filipowski is going to be on the board. Sensabaugh is going to be on the board. Jayshawn Tate, no. Adam Bona, just backup minutes at 39, 36 across sites, not showing any value. Time Lord would gain a little bit of ground. Right now he's just at 4 garbage minutes, but would bounce to 16, somewhere in there, as the direct backup if Ayton's out. I don't know that he necessarily hits value. What's he priced? 48 on FanDuel, no. 42 on DraftKings, probably not. If he got the start, he would look better. Yeah, Power, I think they're going to be so crunched that we're going to see plenty of run for both of those guys, honestly. Doug says, I don't want to play Collier, but I might have to now with no Wallace on the board. Yeah, Collier's interesting because he's not crazy cheap. The opportunity's there for sure, but he doesn't necessarily land. And this is not accounted for in the sim. The hell did he go? There he is. But the 52 on both sites, he's got a long way to go to get to that 5.5 value score on DraftKings. We're already at 28 minutes. So let me see where the path would take him here. We'll go to that for minutes. And we'd have to go way up probably in rate. Can I do this quickly? Let's see. Because it's an interesting one to me. Players out. Everyone. Cody, Kessler, Markkinen. Who else? Clarkson. Collins. That's who I was missing. And let's reset this back to the beginning of this season. .82 minutes, 177 possessions. That's a garbage sample. And it's exactly where I had him. So no actual uptick in rate in this situation, or a rough approximation of this situation. That's over 82 minutes, 177 possessions. He's played at a .78 since the beginning of the year. Again, with as close as we can get to this scenario. Beginning of the season, rather, not the beginning of the year. Let's see if we go... Can I gain ground by shortening that sample? All right. If I move it up from the beginning of December, it's not all that dissimilar. Sample 71 minutes, 151 possessions. We're up to .83, gaining a little bit of ground. So I think .83, .85-ish is probably pretty reasonable for him. So we could say... So 42. As a rough estimate, you're still shy of the 5.5 value there. That's with him going at .86. If we took him up to .95, give him credit for essentially that. That would get him there. If you see him bounce to 30 plus, we're well above our value tier. Technically, 28.5 probably. Yeah, 28.5 gets us about where we want him. But that's not directly accounted for by the uptick of about 4 minutes, I would say, over where I've got him. It's a pretty sharp uptick. So it's not like he's a super bargain basement price at 52. That's the one thing that's the one wrench I would throw into the Collier play. I think he looks good. I think he's going to be very playable. You rerun this sim. I said it before. I think he'd be in this kind of territory. 22%, a little bit below the field maybe, or like this, 31%, a little bit below, a little bit with the field. I don't know that he's a runaway freight train of value. But keep an eye on the reproject. When I have a little bit more time to think it through and update it, I will in the next couple minutes. And if you see him jump to the numbers I just showed on the screen, fire away. Yeah, it's always those minutes I as you mentioned, Reef can come in and pick up like 4, 6, 8 minutes and screw things up. And it's just, if you chisel away two minutes from that Klingon play, it very quickly evens out to the Eubanks play or to a different guy. So it is challenging with the and that's the case for a lot of minutes. I was saying the same about the Golden State minutes as far as all of those guys being projected in the lower mid 20s. One guy plays 2-3 more minutes, he ends up better at the expense of the direct expense of another guy who right now on this end, everybody just kind of looks good but flat with gigantic basements. It's a dicey slate. For a 4-gamer, it really is a tricky little slate. And it's completely different than what we've been looking at as far as these numbers go because we've got all that Utah to deal with. And the minute I get that updated and changed and saved up to the site, that's all going to change. Let's see, more Wednesday news. Yeah, nothing new for today. But I do think we're at a decent enough stopping point. Any crazy questions? Anything to... CA 1047 ended up with a Giannis Adisa bonus stack yesterday. That must have gone off. Doug says, I don't like the point guard position at all outside of Maxey. Can't play Simons. Yeah, unfortunately. Simons is looking kind of like that guy. Dame. Going to sell you Dame for 62% share on DraftKings. Obviously, we're talking about a radically different price tier. But if you're comparing for Maxey, a cheaper Dame, I think that probably is the pivot there, Doug. Also, Steph, he came up lighter than the field, but there's nothing wrong with that Steph spot. And again, you could easily give Steph another couple of points here. I wasn't conservative with it, but I didn't run away with it either. Part of that is the minutes. The games where Steph's going to go out and play this game for 36 minutes, few and far between. So that does put a little artificial cap on where you want to take those two. Switch to Davian and Keon to get to that 3-headed monster. Yeah. Don't remember specifically what they scored, but it doesn't sound like it went well. And going by those names, I can see that. Davian, never my favorite guy. I end up with him a fair amount of the time when he's on the board like that as a mid-range play. He's a guy that does rotate through my lineups, but I don't feel like I've ever actually won with Davian Mitchell. Yeah, I mean, soft spot for Dame as far as the opponent goes, and that could lead to just they didn't need to do as much, didn't need to be as competitive. But 4-gamer, when we're looking for rock solid minutes, top end production for a bit of a discount, he's really him and Steph are like the mispriced stars, I would say, on that DraftKings slate. Right, like there's Dame at 5'3" as far as that value score goes. Steph, I guess, is a little bit closer. He checks in 5'09", 5'11" for Amen. Amen also, by the way, with point guard eligibility. Not coming up quite as strong in our numbers, but a perfectly acceptable play in that spot as another pivot. But yeah, just that value that you're extracting from Dame at just 8,700. He's 9,800 on the FanDuel slate, and that's the correct price, I think, or somewhere in between. But to me, Dame looks a whole lot better at that number and that value score than any, who's that, Maxey and Trey. Both those guys are significantly offset. We got a lot less of them. Again, any given share of Trey, any given share of Maxey, and this applies to everybody from there to there. Any given share of any one of those guys is absolutely fine, especially on this slate. Everybody else, that does not apply to. But any of those guys, those are the stars of the slate, right? I'm not breaking ground here as far as the quality of those players. But I think it's worth highlighting that group to enforce that point. So, just because we're getting a little bit less across 150 lineups, any one of the lineups that any of these guys are in, and that accounts for that less than the field, still accounts for 1 in 4 lineups have one of those 4 guys in them. Right? So it's important to think about that when we're talking about the guys where we're under the field. If you think about the full scope of those 150 lineups, 1 in every 4 lineups has one of AD, LeBron, Maxey, or Trey, even though we're not above 10.67% on any of them. So that reflects like the difference between how these numbers work for 150 lineups versus how they work for 1 lineup, 5 lineups. That's why I'm always trying to hit that point. You can always play some of these guys. It's a weird price swing here. Like this upper echelon, everybody there seems appropriate. And then the next most expensive, I guess it's just weird that it's the next most expensive guy is then Austin Reeves. 78's not a completely terrible price for him. It's off probably a couple $100 high. But it's just weird that he's the next guy. You wouldn't necessarily expect that, but there's nobody really that's worth that much more salary-wise. Very top-heavy slate as far as the stars and the salaries are concerned. Anyway, 520. Bunch of people here hanging out. If there's more questions, drop them in. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Check out rotoscouts.com. Guys, again, I'm trying to not harp on it and I'm trying to not make this like, just plug in the site and everything, but I'm also trying to put as much value back in your pockets as it possibly can. Help you build the bankrolls. Everything at Rotoscouts, access to all of it, under $1 a day for all of it. Right now it's NBA, NHL, every main slate for those. We've got the Super Bowl coming up. We'll have projections for that. MLB right around the corner. No per sport nonsense. Trying to keep everything light. Trying to gear the site, as I've said a bunch of times, toward people playing the lineups that like 85% of people that play these things play, which is 1 lineup, 5 lineups, 10 maybe, depending on the contest they're entering. Everything we have works for the 150 lineup builders too, which is the good news. We've got good partnerships for running optimizers and running sims. But I think it's the best bang for your buck in the industry as far as if you're hand building, if you're building a handful of lineups, regardless of what tools you're using. Under $1 a day gets you access to all of it. So check it out, rotoscouts.com. Otherwise, you guys, good luck out there tonight. I am winding the show down. Nobody dropped a question in while I was pitching. Doug says, I'm heavy on AD, and I hate being heavy on AD because you could break a fingernail in the first quarter. He's been better at that lately, though, right? I feel like he's been better at that. He's been better. They've both been on the injury report a lot this season, but they've both been out there like crazy, and it hasn't been as like, we don't really know the status. Like this year, it's pretty much they're always probable, and they play. I feel like he's completed a lot more games. He came out a few times, I think, this season, but not as bad as it used to be. Oh, Mama did ask a question. Who's the top value at small forward? I will assume that that's a DraftKings question. And I will say that it's definitely Ricky Council. Assuming we're getting Ricky starting, even if he doesn't start, it's going to, as I said before, it's going to be a downtick to like, I would probably knock 4 minutes off of it, still give him like 26, maybe 24, and he would still hit the board as a decent value. But the way that he looks right now, he's absolutely by far the best value at small forward. Outside of him, you've got these guys. They are weaker minutes plays. 24 fragile minutes on Mo Moody, 18 on Whitmore. Both decent producers, both coming up a ton on the short slate just because they're super, super cheap on DraftKings. But you can see what the higher prices for those guys due to that kind of exposure. So that's just a price-driven one. I think this is a better opportunity. And then you've got guys that are just a little bit more secure depending on what kind of play we're looking for, right? So there is a difference in that answer. If you're looking for, I need a value at small forward, and I think your question was value, Mamba. Yeah, top value. But if you need it like pure value, out of the box value, then it's one of those three with a strong preference for Ricky Council. If you just need I can take a mid-range guy, you've got some pretty good options right there. Ignore Larry Markkinen, obviously. He's, for one, didn't come up anyway. I'll resort this by distribution here, and it'll jam up the whole thing because I'm an idiot and this is filtered. I hate when I do that. Anyway, I'll talk through it. So as far as those mid-range guys, with an $8,000 Amin, with Denny at 72, $6,800 Wiggins, $5,700 DeAndre Hunter, you've got decent options through that group. So it really, really comes down to how you're defining your question. Out of those mid-board guys, I think the minor uptick to the 57 on Hunter is kind of interesting. We did get him less than the field, but still 1 in 5 shares. And then Denny, who we did mention before at 72, slightly higher to climb from the 57 for Hunter, but is another alternative with a pretty appreciable upside, a good per minute guy, one of the more solid guys from the late game as far as minutes are going to go, with a very strong ceiling. I don't mind the Denny play there either. I like him, I think, better than Wiggins, better than Kamara. Nobody else really looks all that interesting. So, again, just comes down to how you define that question, that small forward that you're looking for. Yes, Fee's going to get a bump. I think he was not on the board. I might have had him for 1 minute. He might be in here with like 1 minute on him somewhere, but probably not. I think I didn't have him project. Let's see. Yeah, I had him at 0 before, but he'll definitely play now. So he'll get an uptick. Could start. Pain in the ass. Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it, Tiz, until I saw the bottom of the chat there that it got mentioned. And yeah, that's going to be on the board. But I didn't have him projected, so he's not on this board. Other guys that will probably creep into at least a little bit of relevance. Micah Potter, I don't have currently projected, but we'll probably see at least a few minutes. If I'm remembering correctly, got the start in the most recent game. Got to look at that. So yeah, 4 guys that were projected are not playing for Utah. It's going to be dramatically different. So if he gets 1.28 points per minute, 28% usage, how big a sample is that, Power? Let's see. Yeah, and that one that I pulled up before, he was 96 minutes, 206 possessions of 1.20 since the start of December in roughly equivalent of this situation. So, yeah, he's going to be on the board. It's going to come down to one where we land that 1.20 because that is still a pretty small sample for a player that we know kind of well. But 2, it's going to also come down to the minutes. He's 42, 45. That's going to bounce off of some of the $3,000 guys on the board a little bit. Not great. But he'll get in the mix. I just don't think he's necessarily the smash spot value that some of the $3,000 guys are. All right. Let me get out of here and start tackling some of those updates. It's 5:30. We've gone long enough. Good luck out there tonight, you guys. Somebody go win something. Share it when you do. I love seeing those screenshots come down. And we'll be back at this tomorrow, so come on back for more. Later.